How's it going, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the James Lab Podcast. Today, our special guest is Andrew DeAngelo for the second time.
Yes.
Maybe third time. But yeah, you've been here before.
Oh, yes, I have. And it's a pleasure to be here again. Thanks for having me again, James.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for coming on. And we're not bringing you here just to talk about you today. You have a really special thing to share with our audience. And I thought it was extremely important. Dennis Peron, who is one of the most essential people in cannabis and the reason we're here today. So tell us a little bit about why you're here.
Okay. So there's a documentary film about the life and times of Dennis Peron and the original Cannabis Buyers Club, the very first one that he started in San Francisco in the early 90s, mid 90s, all through the 90s. Yeah. And it's playing at the Roxy Theater February 7th at 6 p.m. at the Roxy Theater in San Francisco. It's part of the San Francisco Independent Film Festival. Wow. You can find it on their website. It's the only San Francisco theatrical showing of this movie.
Nice.
The movie does not yet have distribution. So I'm encouraging everybody in the community to come out and see this movie, because you're not just going to learn about Dennis. You're going to learn about John Entwistle, his husband, when he died. Mm-hmm. John was right next to Dennis this entire 30, 40 years that they worked together on legalizing weed and the Cannabis Buyers Club. And John is one of the unsung heroes of our movement. You talk about we're all standing on the shoulders of Dennis. We're all standing on the shoulders of John. We're all standing on the shoulders of Brownie Mary, mm-hmm. and a whole host of other characters that helped bring that Cannabis Buyers Club to life. You're talking about dozens, if not a few hundred people, mostly from the LGBTQ community, mostly queer folks, right? That's where our movement emerged from. And it all came from the HIV/AIDS crisis that was happening at that time. The film talks all about that, and the origin story of that talks about Jonathan, Dennis's lover, who died of HIV, mm-hmm. and testified at Brownie Mary's trial. Okay, Brownie Mary was busted. The film talks all about that bust. Dennis Peron was busted, not once, but several times. Not only busted, he was shot by the cops.
Wow.
During one of the raids. And that whole story is also in the movie. And a couple other fun facts about the movie real quick, and then we can talk a little bit more about Dennis. But the cop that did all the surveillance of Dennis, mm-hmm. the filmmakers interview him. And he's got an interesting backstory, because he was the very first cop in the entire country to come out of the closet as gay. And he was a member of the San Francisco Police Department. What other police department would hire, openly gay folks, right? Mm-hmm. And he was on the cover of Time magazine as the very first cop to come out of the closet. And he hated weed.
Wow.
He hated weed, man, with a passion, this guy. This guy hated weed as much as we love weed.
Yeah.
Okay, this guy, and to this day, you can tell from the interview, this guy's still a prohibitionist, right? And so it's very complex to see the very first out of the closet cop, right, also be against weed, investigating a group of gay and queer folks that are using weed to save and extend life during this terrible crisis that was happening within this guy's community that he was a part of. And so what a complex character that is, right? And the other cop that's interviewed is the former Attorney General of California, Dan Lundgren, who also ran for governor, lost, thankfully. Thankfully, he lost. But he's still a prohibitionist, still a heavy drug warrior. And he recounts the story of prosecuting Dennis and the Buyers Club because, and the film talks about this too, the city would not prosecute him. The city attorney, the head prosecutor at that time, refused to prosecute Dennis.
Amazing.
So then the cop who did the surveillance was like, I got to take this to the state because my city won't do it. My lead prosecutor will not charge Dennis and the Buyers Club. And so he took it. Eventually, he had to work his way up the chain of command like all cops have to do, right? And he gets to the Attorney General of the state of California, okay? And the Attorney General of the state of California decides to take the case on.
Wow.
And spends millions of dollars. I kid you not. And this is all in the movie. Spends millions of taxpayer dollars to investigate Dennis and the Buyers Club, to surveillance the Buyers Club, not just the Buyers Club, people who work there, Dennis, the castle, which is Dennis's house in the Castro district, affectionately called the Castle. John Entwistle still lives there, right? And all those folks that stayed at the castle were under surveillance too. And it was a real intense law enforcement operation that went down there, culminating in ultimately the closure of the Buyers Club, the big Buyers Club that Dennis had on Market Street. Some of your viewers and listeners may remember going to that if they're old enough, right? And if you're not old enough to have stood shoulder to shoulder with Dennis in that community, come see the movie because you will get transported back into that time. And I think most importantly, man, you'll learn how dangerous it was for us, for our community, man. It didn't matter if you were gay or straight. If you worked with this plant, it was dangerous, man. It wasn't just dangerous like your freedom, like you're going to go to prison. You could get shot by cops. You could get killed by cops. You could get killed in prison.
You could get life sentences.
You could get, many people did. You had them on the show.
Absolutely.
Richard and others, right? Luke, right?
Yeah, Luke and Richard. And
these guys, just tremendous, right? And they're pioneers and warriors too. They did the time. Okay. Right now, it's hard for us to remember how dangerous it was, especially the younger people coming up. It's just, it's a different.
It's just easy. It's easy now, right? And, if you forget your past, you're destined to repeat your mistakes.
Yeah, and we're seeing that, right? There are initiatives to repeal legalization happening right now in Maine, Massachusetts, and Arizona, driven by smart approaches on marijuana. A prohibitionist group led by a guy named Kevin Sabet. And they are well-funded and they are smart adversaries, okay? And we have to take these initiatives very, very seriously that are happening because you're right, James.
Yeah.
If we do not protect our rights and our history, prohibition will come back.
Yeah.
It will come back.
Yeah, it's a sad thing because, so many of the people that watch this show and so many of my friends, we believe that this plant makes the world a better place. Like you, your brother, and so many of us, and we're willing to fight for it, but we shouldn't have to take steps backwards. I understand take one step back, take two steps forward. But if we're taking one step forward, two steps back, that's a problem.
Couldn't agree more, and our adversaries, the prohibitionists, they are just as determined as we are.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of folks in our community underestimate that, right? Because they think we've already won.
Yeah.
And in some ways we have, right? There's more people working with this plant, consuming this plant, being with this plant than ever before, right? We've done a great job with that. But our adversaries are pissed.
Yeah.
Right. And they are motivated, man. And, we had the hemp ban happen this year.
Right.
At the U.S. Congress, recriminalizing hemp. All right. A lot of people are trying to extend the moratorium on that or get that reversed. And I hope they succeed. I really, really do.
We still have time.
Still have time. All right.
And then we had Schedule 3 happen.
Then we had Schedule 3 happen,
Yeah.
right? Which is, depending on how you look at it, like you said, step forward in some ways,
Yeah.
maybe a couple steps back in another way, because if you're sitting in federal prison right now,
Yeah.
S3 doesn't help you, man. It does nothing for you, right? And if you're trapping loads right now, or you're in the legacy market right now and you're trying to get legal, S3 doesn't help you, right? Because the barrier to entry is just going to get higher.
Right.
With S3, right? And our people can't get into the legal market. These barriers are too high for them. And, there's very few times I'll say something's too high, but barriers to entry for our folks to participate are too high right now. We've got to change that. And that was the wonderful thing about hemp.
Yeah.
And is the wonderful thing about hemp. The barrier to entry is relatively low.
Yeah.
Okay. And a lot of our people found refuge in hemp and were able to just provide for their families, man. There might be a few big hemp companies, a few come to mind that are doing very well. Maybe they're making millions of dollars, and that's great for them. But by and large, most people in the game are just providing for their households, just like you are, just like people in the license market. We're just trying to provide for our households like we have with this plant our whole lives, right? And so we have to fight. We have to not get complacent. And this film really will inspire people. It will show you the world that you will live in if prohibition comes back. Okay, it will show you what happens to you when we're not legal. And it will be a powerful reminder for us to do two things. One, continue our advocacy to make sure we free the plant and the people as much as we can, and continue to work with the plant, man, and make it as medicinally excellent as we can. Before the show, you were talking about new technologies that amazing people in our community are developing that will allow people with cancer to find terpene profiles that, hit their exact form of cancer in the exact way that they need. And these are very exciting things, our community's developing. And I'm so happy to just see all the innovations you're doing right here at James Loud Genetics and all the innovations I'm seeing, because that is another way that we combat prohibition. Okay, as we make the plant excellent.
Yeah. We're just stewards. We're just stewards trying to move the plant forward, and hopefully it's in a positive way.
That's
And
right,
at the end
man.
of the day, I think we all have our job, and it's not a one size fits all. We're not all doing the same thing. There's so many different things that need to be done. And, I love that we got to see it through the 90s, through the 2000s, the 2010s, and now through the 2020s. It's changed so much. And we just got a glimpse of legalization. And really, Dennis Peron was a huge advocate for the plant. He's someone that we all should look up to. He's someone that we all should celebrate. Because if it wasn't for people like him who, and there's several people like Dennis Peron, he may be the pinnacle, but there's the Ed Rosenthals who stood up in court.
Oh, yeah.
And there's so many other guys that did prison time that or were shot and killed for this plant.
Oh, yeah.
And it's beautiful that we're starting to celebrate people like Dennis on a bigger scale with movies and stuff like that. Because I feel like we know several people who deserve movies. I think you and your brother deserve a documentary at some point for all the stuff you guys did with Harborside, because without that kind of action, we wouldn't have the legalization that we have today. Whether you want to call that full legalization or whatever it is, the place we're at today is because of people like yourself, people like your brother, guys like Ed Rosenthal, guys like Dennis, and so many of the guys who put their neck out for the plant and risked it all. And I was there to witness it. I've been participating in this since 1991. I've been smoking since 91 and growing since the mid-90s. I saw the early days of Harborside, and it's just, reflecting back, I feel really blessed to be a part of something so much bigger than myself, because that's what this is. It's a beautiful thing.
No, I'm glad you said that, and shout out all the pioneers. You know, there's so many that we can't possibly name them all in the time that we have together. And what's great about this movie was it was not made outside of our community. It was made by Kip Andersen and Chris O'Donnell are the co-directors. Kip supplied the Buyers Club with weed when he was a young grower, just like you in the 1990s. He knew Dennis. He was part of that community, and then he started taking film classes. And he's made several documentaries. If you look up Kip Andersen, KIP, on Instagram, you'll see he has like 50,000 followers on Instagram. You'll see the other films he's made there. And it's just a super skilled filmmaker and his partner Chris, and they emerge from our community. So one of the things that I love to see is great stories being told by our community for our community, right? And this is one of them. And you know, a lot of things can be taken from us by corporate cannabis, right? A lot of things can be taken from us. Harborside was taken from us.
Totally.
And many of you probably have had similar, right, experiences with your businesses being disrupted, your supply chains. All these things can be taken from us. But what can't be taken from us are stories and our culture. And I call it hipstery, not history, and our hipstery, you know. And so it's really important that we tell these stories, right? And it's really important once they're told and told well that we make sure the world knows about them, right? And that's kind of what we're doing here today, because the Roxy has 244 seats in it.
Yeah.
And let's sell the Roxy out, man. Let's have our community show up, because I promise you, when the last moment of this film ends, you will stand up and cheer in the theater. Absolutely no doubt in my mind that will be the reaction that all of us have when we watch the movie in the theater. And we're also trying to organize a little reception before the film at Meadow. Meadow, you know, is a tech company, and they have a wonderful space in San Francisco. So keep your eyes out on social media. There might be something as part of this podcast where you get to see the programming and the address and the particulars for the reception at Meadow. But a bunch of people that are in the film are going to speak at that reception. And I'm hoping that Ed and some of these pioneers and high holies show up, and we have multi-generations, you know, gathering together, sharing cannabis together. I know you're going to be there with.
I'm going to be there with something special for every single person that shows up. Literally, we're going to have a little gift bag with James Loud Genetics and some flour and some samples and some fun stuff.
Well, that's great, man. So like, that's like so generous of you. And you know, as I sort of populate this, because a lot of people don't know this is happening, right? And as I sort of champion this, the community, like what you just said, is starting to say, hey, I got something to contribute to this. I can show up for this. I can buy 10 tickets for my dispensary and give them away to my customers or give them away to my employees. And that's how we're going to fill up the Roxy, you know, and have just a wonderful, special evening together. I think it really has that potential. And when we're done at Meadow, we're all going to walk over to the Roxy. It's about a 15-minute walk.
Yep.
Those of us that are able-bodied enough to do that, those of us who aren't, rideshare and other carpooling will be organized, you know, from Meadow over to the Roxy Theater. The movie's a quick less than 90 minutes. It moves really fast. And there's going to be a Q&A with the filmmakers. But you will get done in time to jump on the BART and go see the Dark Star Orchestra shows at the Fox Theater that night.
It's going to be amazing. Get your tickets now, though, because I think Saturday night, the GA is already sold out for Saturday night. So Friday night, you can still get general admission. Hopefully by the time that people watch this, they'll be able to see that still. But like, yeah, Dark Star Orchestra is going to be amazing. You know, with the passing of Bob Weir, These shows are so important. It's an amazing thing. But let's not get off topic too much. Let's talk about Dennis and your experience with Dennis. For people that are watching that don't know who Dennis is, because some of them, the younger generation, they might not know Dennis. But let's start with who Dennis was and what Dennis did that was so amazing.
Dennis Peron grew up in the Bronx in New York. And like a lot of people from the 60s generation, he was drafted into the Vietnam War. He did not want to go to the Vietnam War, but he was drafted and he had to go. And so he was dropped in Vietnam. He was in the infantry. He already knows he's a gay male. He has not experienced gay intimacy yet in his life. He's 18 years old, okay? And he grew up in the Bronx, big Italian family. The last thing he could really do is come out of the closet, right, at that time. So he gets dropped in Vietnam and, his superiors are like, you got to pick up this gun and start killing some Vietnamese. And Dennis said, no, I'm not doing that. And so they put him in the morgue. And he had never seen a dead body before. And within the first month of working in the morgue, he saw thousands. Okay. At that time, Vietnam was kind of peaking in terms of how many young men were dying. American young men were dying in Vietnam. And so Dennis was a tobacco smoker, like a lot of people, especially if you're serving in the military, right? At that time. And someone in Vietnam handed him a joint. And he smoked his first joint when he was over there. A lot of people in the service experienced their first cannabis when they were serving in Vietnam or Laos or that Southeast Asia, because weed's very prominent in that part of the world.
Chocolate Thai.
Exactly, right?
Black Vietnamese. They have some amazing genetics over there, yeah.
And this was the 60s before all these genetics changed, right? And you're talking about like land race only, really.
Southeast Asian, amazing genetics. I mean, I wish I would have been able to experience it myself.
Right. And so Dennis smokes that first joint and he's like, converted immediately, like many of us. That's what happened to me with my first joint. I'm sure that's what happened to you with your first joint. Yeah. Some of us, we get that first joint in us and it changes your whole trajectory in life. And you're like, this is what I'm doing.
Right.
And Dennis had that inspiration also. And so somehow he managed not to get killed over there, even though he was in infantry. I think he just spent a lot of time in the morgue, right? And so he didn't get killed over there. Thankfully for all of us, right? And but he did bring 3 pounds of weed back with him. Decided he was going to go to San Francisco. I think he had had his first gay experience in overseas, I believe, with another service member. That's not in the movie, but that's something I kind of just know about Dennis. And so he came back to the States, not to the Bronx where he grew up, but to San Francisco, right? And it was either just before or just after the Summer of Love. And Dennis started selling weed and being a gay hippie in the Castro. And that's where he really started his career. And he, one of the first thing, and Dennis, he grew up in this big Italian family, right? So he liked having lots of people around him. And, cannabis facilitates that, especially in those days, like we said a moment ago, very dangerous, right? To be close to this plant. And one of the things I love about that time in our history was if you were next to this plant and you met somebody else that was next to this plant, you became friends like instantly, man, because it was dangerous, right? And you had to protect each other. And you knew that, right? You knew that. You couldn't like share a joint without also sharing a deep level of trust, man. You're not going to snitch on me, right? Right. Okay. I'm not going to snitch on you. Joint, back and forth. And so Dennis quickly started a commune. And it was a gay commune, and they sold weed to each other, and that was called, I think it was called the Big Top. And then they needed more room, and so he opened a cafe, called the Island Cafe. And this is all covered in the movie. So, you know, the movie does a much better job of telling this than I do. And then above the Island Cafe was basically the very first weed store. And if you knew the secret handshake at the cafe,
Right.
they would let you upstairs to buy weed from Dennis. And they were selling weed, according to the film, to a few hundred people a day at that time, right? And so that got the attention of law enforcement because he had a public restaurant where anybody could go to, right? And then above the restaurant was the weed store. And it didn't take long for the cops to, get wind of it. And they decided they were going to raid Dennis's house and they were going to bust Dennis. And they did so, right?
Wow.
And this was his first. And not only did they raid his house, they were all undercover cops,
Crazy.
right? So they did not identify themselves as cops, right? And so Dennis thought they were getting ripped off. He didn't know they were cops. He thought they were getting ripped off. So he picks up this giant, one of those like water bottle, 5-gallon plastic water bottles. They might have been made out of glass in those days.
Right.
And he was getting ready to throw it down the stairs because you had to go up the stairs to bust him. And the undercover cop pulls out a gun and shoots Dennis in the leg, right? And then they take the badge out and put the gun to the head, all right, and say, you're going to die if you make one more move, right? And then Dennis had to kind of lay low for a while. His case had a very interesting twist to it, which I won't reveal because it's in the movie and I want people to watch the movie. But it had a very interesting, he was looking at 5 years, all right, is what he was looking at. He ended up serving, I think, time served. They locked him up for a while, a couple months, and he might have gotten a little bit more time after the case. But because of this very weird thing that happened during the case where the cops basically effed up seriously during the trial, he didn't have to serve a lot of time, and I think it ended up being a misdemeanor on his record. And so he was able to, in not too long a period of time, start selling weed again, right? And then shortly thereafter, AIDS happens, man. And his lover at the time, a guy named Jonathan West, I think was his last name, got HIV/AIDS. Right. And somehow Dennis didn't. And Jonathan started dying, and Dennis noticed that when he gave Jonathan weed, Jonathan could eat, and one of the problems with AIDS in those days, there weren't any drugs to combat it, right? Or there was a few things to slow it down. But like now you have these drug cocktails you can stay alive with this virus in you for decades.
It's
right?
much different now than it was back then.
Yeah, like Magic Johnson's still around, right?
My aunt is one of the, if not the longest living survivors of AIDS.
Oh, wow.
HIV and AIDS, she was diagnosed in the 70s. Our family said that was it. In the 90s, when she got full-blown AIDS, I believe it was in 91 or 92, everyone said, yeah, she's going to die and all this. A lot of people did die.
Oh, yeah.
She is still alive. She's outliving all those people that said she was going to die.
Well, good for her, and that I didn't know about that in your family, and that's in and of itself, miraculous. And Dennis noticed that all of his friends with the virus were also, their lives were being extended with weed, and their end of life was a lot more comfortable. Because they were able to take cannabis, right? Because one of the things that happened in those days, and still happens if you're queer, is your families disown you, and you're literally sitting in the hospital dying, and you've got no one in your family visiting you, holding your hand, comforting you, telling you, I love you, right? But Dennis and Brownie Mary, who's also in the film, Brownie Mary Rathburn, was a little old lady who made pot brownies and gave them to HIV patients at San Francisco General Hospital. She gets busted too. She got busted after Dennis got shot, but before the Buyers Club was shut down. And her case is very interesting too, because Jonathan, on his deathbed, Dennis's lover, Jonathan, on his deathbed gets wheeled into the courtroom of Brownie Mary's trial and testifies and says, this woman was giving me my medicine. And the film, again, tells this story really, really well. And I won't, give away what happens, but very interesting, right? And so that whole story is also in the movie. And so Dennis was, and his partner in activism at that time, a guy named John Entwistle, who's in the movie and will be at the reception. We've already talked about that, I think. But they decided they were going to do something to get arrested for giving weed and selling weed to really sick people. And that's where the first Cannabis Buyers Club was born. And they did it in this tiny little apartment in San Francisco. And much to their surprise, they didn't get busted. And it was a different time in the city because of the HIV crisis. The gay community was organizing itself a lot more. The gay community was becoming a political force in San Francisco with the election of Harvey Milk to the Board of Supervisors. That whole story is also in the movie.
Wow.
And Dennis was very close to Harvey Milk. Those of you who saw the Sean Penn movie, Milk, Dennis, there was an actor, I forget the actor's name, who played Dennis in that movie. Right. And so Harvey, when he became part of the Board of Supervisors, the whole gay community got a lot more political power, right? And so the city of San Francisco had to start listening to gay people, right? The political apparatus had to start respecting the gay community, because those folks were coming out and voting, because in the very first Buyers Club that Dennis started, and even I think at the Island Cafe, he would not sell you weed unless you registered to vote. So that was like his
It's the best thing ever. They should do that at every dispensary.
Yeah, I mean,
to be honest,
it's so pioneering, right? That he did that, and it's like he knew that people wanted weed, and he knew that registering to vote is like half a pay. It's easy to do.
No big deal.
No big deal, right? And it's easy to dismiss democracy, but democracy is how we legalized weed. Okay, It's how Harvey Milk became a supervisor. It's how so much progress has been made.
It's how you make change. It's the only way you can really make change on a global level or on a national level.
Certainly in the mainstream.
Even in local. Yeah. I mean, definitely local community. It starts with local community, and it grows from there. Yeah,
that's right. And Dennis understood that, probably because he went to Vietnam, right? And he was really determined to change the world. I mean, that first joint he smoked, like many of us, really inspired him. I've got to change the world. It's time. It's time to change the world. So they tried to get busted, and then they didn't get busted, and then they needed a bigger place. And they started to do the initiative process, right? The voter initiative process. So the first one they got done was in the city of San Francisco. If you collect enough signatures, you can put something on the ballot that's just for the city.
Right.
And so they did that first. And we won that election in 1992. I think it was even called Proposition P. I don't think that was for Peron, but I think that was just what came out of the hat. I think that's what it was called. I might be mistaken on that, but I think that's what it was called. And then, once we won that one, they moved to a bigger place for the Buyers Club that was right above this old gay bar on Market and Church Street called The Transfer, which is closed now, but in those days was a somewhat notorious gay bar. And they were right above that. And it was much bigger than the first place apartment they were And that's where the cops started to do surveillance, right? Because they were seeing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people every day. All right. The epidemic was getting worse and worse and worse. And people were learning about the Buyers Club more and more and more. Right.
And there was limited accessibility. It wasn't like it is today.
No, it was the only place you could go. A lot of people could go to get this medicine.
Besides the streets where it was dangerous.
That's right. And Brownie Mary talks a lot about, how dangerous it was to deal brownies and other things on the street, right? And so everyone was really motivated to get legal because not only was it dangerous for law enforcement, it was just kind of dangerous, right? In general. And it certainly didn't celebrate the plant the way and the medicine the way they want it to. So and then they outgrew the transfer bar spot. And I forget what year it was, like 90, right after the initiative won, I think in 96, they moved to the Market Street building. You probably remember the Market Street building, big, giant, 30,000 square foot, 4-story building, man. And it was the Mecca. It was the Mecca. I remember some of the first weed I ever sold in California as a young dealer was to that Buyers Club. I tried to sell weed when they're above the transfer, but my weed wasn't good enough or the price wasn't right. And Dennis kept very politely saying, "No, Andrew, I'm sorry. You're going to have to keep trying, man." And I would end up buying weed there, of course, because their weed was better than mine. And so I'd go in there with one intention and leave with a different one. But hey, that's the life of a young weed trader, right? In those days. And then, eventually Dan Lundgren and all the rest of them were able to shut down that club. But, Dennis becomes a cultural icon in the gay community and a true pioneer in the cannabis community. Really, the first person that had the balls, to fucking do this, man. And to do it in public and to open their doors to everybody and anybody who had a doctor's recommendation. Okay. And to Dennis, and he says this, all use was medical for him. You know, even if you're like trying to get quote unquote high.
Whether you believe it or not, the exact quote is, whether you believe it or not, cannabis is medical, right?
Yeah.
And so I've said it on my podcast about 20 times.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing quote because it's true.
Yes.
Whether you believe it's medical, whether you believe it or not, it's medical.
Everyone's got an endocannabinoid system, man.
Makes the world a better place.
It does. And we know this. Okay. I mean, the human being I was before I took cannabis, I would not like that person. I would not like that person. I was a jock. I played sports. All I cared about was sports. Yeah. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I was in high school when I had my first joint and I was just lost, man. And I didn't really like myself. And then I had that first joint and I was like, okay, there's a lot more to life than playing sports, right? And so that's what this plant does. Not to maybe every single person that takes it, but to a lot of us, right? It completely changes the trajectory of your life because of that medicinal, universal aspect to the plant. And so Dennis knew that. And so basically after that Buyers Club shut down, Dennis kind of is going into, I think, a semi-retirement sort of retreats into the castle, teaches at Oaksterdam University once that gets going, and kind of does the speaking circuit a little bit, right? And he's interviewed for this film. Literally, the very last interview of Dennis Peron is for this film.
Wow.
And it happens, I think, 2 or 3 months before he passes. You can tell he had a stroke. So his speech is impaired by the stroke. but you can still understand him, and the filmmakers have subtitles in there for those who can't. But I could still understand him, and I knew Dennis, so it was a little maybe easier for me. But and it's so powerful, right? To see this last interview of Dennis when he's in he's not even in his home. He's like in this place, a rehab center for folks that have strokes, right? But he's still Dennis, right? And he gives just this knockout interview, man. It's just so powerful, where he recants this whole story of his life, just a little bit that I've told here. And by this time, I think Dennis died in 2018, I think it was, or right around when sort of the effery of Prop 64 happened, right?
Right.
And Dennis was not a fan of 64. He wasn't a fan of adult use legalization. He wrote 215, literally. I mean, he wrote it. So he wanted that framework to stay in place.
Absolutely.
Right? And we all have the benefit of hindsight now. Dennis was right, man.
Yeah.
You only get one shot in a state like California to do a framework. And we had a really good one with 215. And, one of my big regrets in life is supporting 64. I supported 64 after it got on the ballot. Before it got on the ballot, I was, a little bit.
Well, when we talk about one step back, two steps forward, 64 for all of us, I believe, regardless of whether you thought it was right or wrong, it was a step forward, but it was a step backwards at the same time, right? So if we want to move forward, we got to do this. We want it to be legal. We don't want people in prison. And that's why I was in favor of it, because I feel like people don't deserve prison for this plant. It's a plant.
Me too. Exact same reason we supported it. Steve and I in Harborside really leaned into it. We did get out the vote and all that stuff, because remember, Prop 19 lost in 2010.
Right.
And that, after Prop 19 lost, a bunch of people did get busted. And 400 dispensaries in this state were shut down by the feds from forfeiture actions.
Yeah.
Okay. Until they got to 401, which was Harborside. That's another story for another time. I think we've probably already told that story on the podcast. But Dennis, so that's a little bit of who Dennis Peron was, right? And the movie really brings out his courage, right? Because most of us, including myself at that time, we were too scared to open a weed club that was open to just about anyone in the public, that was open to the public.
Yeah.
Right. That was like sending the DEA a letter saying, "Dear DEA, please bust me. Here's the address and hours of operation." Right. That's what it was like. And Dennis had that courage, and he was not afraid of getting busted, partly because he had already been busted and shot. Right. Yeah. So he was like, how much worse can it get other than,
right.
And he had been to jail. And when you've been to prison and you spent a little bit of time there, you're not as intimidated by it, perhaps, as before you ever go into the criminal justice system like that. And Dennis was just so brave, right? Just so brave. And that's really one of his greatest qualities, was his bravery. The other thing that Dennis was really good at was articulating things in front of the camera for the media. He was really excellent at communicating with the media. And he didn't have any formal training in that, but he learned from his buddy Harvey Milk. And I think Harvey Milk really taught him a lot. You notice Dennis is almost always wearing a suit and tie, or at least a shirt and a tie.
Right.
In those days. Harvey Milk always wore a suit and tie. They wanted to be in a costume. They didn't wear, suits and ties around their homes when they were just hanging out. They did that when they were in public because they needed to be create a public image that mainstream America could look at and say, oh yeah, normal person. And suit and tie is how you did that. You know, I wore suits and ties, testifying in front of city councils. And, you know, I'm sure you've had to don the outfit as well, right? And that's part of our strategy, right? Is to do whatever it takes to get mainstream America to listen to us and to back the F off. Right. And so Dennis, you'll see that, you know, you'll see his media savviness and his ability to disseminate complex information about this plant and this medicine to anybody.
So I got a good question for you, because we've been talking for a little bit here, and I just came to the realization that something magic happened between 1940 and 1955. We have this generation of people that I would call elders now, or people that I respect from that generation, who really helped move the plant forward. You know, Ed Rosenthal's from New York.
Yep.
You know, we can talk about Ed. We can talk about Soma, Mark Rossman.
Oh, yeah.
Right? He's from New York, from that era. I think he was born in 1949.
Okay.
Then we've got you and your brother.
DC.
So DC, but you're East Coast. Close enough.
Coast. Yep.
Close enough, and you guys operated. And then there's Richard DeLisi. Yep. He's New York. He's from that era. So something magical happened. Maybe not when you guys were born. Maybe it was when you guys were teenagers, you know, and you guys all to a degree pioneered what we're doing today. And there's like this interesting thing that happened in New York. I don't know what it was, but that East Coast thing in New York, and the beauty of that actually spread, it was contagious, and it spread to California, or it was from California, either way. But it basically came this thing that, like New York, we got San Francisco now, and there's this relationship. You know, even Don Pereira, he's been on the show.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, and it's like, you know, and then the guys he was working with, there were some guys from New York as well. So It's like this interesting connection that I was thinking about. And I wonder, without New York in that time and those people that I've just mentioned, what the world would look like today if it wasn't for that generation.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. First of all, that generation just had a lot of balls. Overall, you know, and I think that generation was really fed up with mainstream America, because mainstream America was not just conservative with respect to being queer or with respect to being a stoner. It was conservative even if you're just liberal, man, you know, or you wanted to end war, or you are a pacifist, or whatever it might be that was on the progressive side of things. Racial rights, you know, talk about getting your head blown off. I mean, that was also at a apex, you know, in the 60s and 70s, you know, what was going on with Black power and Black rights and people of color and immigrant rights and women's rights. I mean, it was a time where people were really trying to move the country into a more progressive direction. And it took courage, man. All those movements had leaders and soldiers that just, like I said, had big balls, man. Really, really courageous people. And so, and New York, you know, New York is where the good weed was if you were on the East Coast. It was really hard to find good weed. And most of the good weed either came from Colombia, Jamaica, or California, right? As that whole revolution in the 70s and 80s with growers in California started to happen. We used to call it Sensimilla back in the early days, right? California Sensimilla.
The seedless.
Yeah, right. And if you were, so you'd had to go to New York to get the good weed, right? Yeah. And guys like Richard were bringing it in. Richard DeLisi were bringing it in by the ton, man. And so I think high quality cannabis actually drove a lot of these relationships, and somehow California was just, it was a bigger state. It had more remote areas for people to grow weed in. It had movements happening, progressive movements happening like we're just talking about now. And a lot of us got busted on the East Coast, right? And after we got done, including my older brother, and after we got done dealing with those legal cases, we got the heck out of Dodge, man. We came to California where, you know, it wasn't quite as bad. And so I think there was a lot to just following the good weed and the traders and the trappers and the growers and the smugglers and all those folks. And I think High Times, you know, High Times started in New York. Tom Forssad was a big New York trader and smuggler and someone my brother bought and sold weed with. And talk about somebody with courage, right? Tom Forssad starting a magazine. It wasn't just about weed. It was about all drugs. It was about being a hedonist and ending all drug wars.
And it was a real magazine too. It wasn't just some printed magazine that someone did in their basement. And there's nothing wrong with those two. I have respect for that.
Yeah.
But it was a real magazine, and it evolved into being a real and the biggest cannabis magazine of all time.
That's right, man. And it's so great to see that magazine in new hands with Josh and just the resurgence of that brand and that flag. I love it too, because it went through some rough patches, man, really rough patches. But High Times is back. But High Times played a big role in sort of connecting all these groups from New York and California and other parts of the country and over in Holland and some of these other places in the world, India and places where there were little patches of cannabis freedom. High Times would kind of stitch all those patches together in a beautiful quilt, and it enabled us to communicate with each other. You'd read about something in High Times, go, oh man, I'm going to India, man. I'm going to find those people. And you did. You went there and you found them and you got their weed or you got their genetics or you got their seeds or whatever it might be, right? And then we brought it back home and we worked with it and we shared it. And it was very much a shared economy, you know, in those days. It wasn't like this brutal money grab transactional reality we're kind of in right now.
It was a community. It was a real community. We were a community, and I feel like people that read High Times, a lot of them would read it and you realize those are your people, right? These are my people. This is what I want to do. Like, you get excited about that kind of stuff. Like other people read car magazines and get excited about cars.
Yes.
We could read this and it was like, wow, the potential is just so much more than I thought it was. Like, there's people doing this at such a bigger level that I knew existed. They're doing all these other things. There's green hash. I'd never seen green hash before till High Times. Not that it was really good when I first tried green hash, but I saw it on the cover of a High Times in a Valentine's Day box. Valentine's Day is coming up.
Yep.
And I saw that was one of my favorite covers too, was the Valentine's Day box with all the hash. I believe Malcolm McKenna took the photos for that.
All right.
He's been on the podcast.
All right. Yeah, man.
But yeah, High Times and their contribution is just amazing too. And I feel like it's this system and this group of amazing people that really absolutely had balls, absolutely were driven by something they were extremely passionate about. And I think a lot of times it gets forgotten today. I think a lot of people forget about how we got here, all the struggles and the pain, because it's easy. And because a lot of people are new, they were never there. So they don't even think about it. They don't even think, well, how did we get here? You know, without podcasts telling the story, they wouldn't even know.
Right. And High Times told the story, you know, and they were the only beacon of light telling the story. And that's why the stories are so important. And that's why your podcast is so important. That's why, you know, so many people that are making films and trying to make sure we don't lose this history or hipstery. You know, it's super important. We have to be the curators of our own archaeology, because mainstream society is not going to do it for us. The Smithsonian Institution's not going to do it for us. Corporate cannabis could give two Fs about any of this. If anything, they're going to try to rewrite history and say, it's because of us.
Right.
And it's not because of them. It's because of people like Dennis and Tom and High Times and Richard and all these pioneers, right?
And Dennis was in High Times. He's been featured in High Times.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so, yeah. Many times.
Yeah, it's just this connection with this community and this, you know, it's all so intertwined together.
That's right.
You know? And it's like, it was. And now it's less and less intertwined. It's intertwined in a different way.
That's right.
But it was such a smaller community too.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, just the Dennis High Times connection between those people. And then we get into everybody else, and it's like that community was actually pretty small in comparison to how big it is today. I mean, there's lots of people I don't know in the community today even. And it's like, not that I ever knew everybody, but it was like a much more close-knit community back then.
You would see the same people at the same events over and over again, right? Or you would see them, people would just come through your town that you lived in and crash at your house, right? Or you would crash at their houses because, people didn't have money for hotels and fancy things. And and certainly in those days, you couldn't smoke no weed in a hotel, right? Without, again, serious danger.
Cops are going to show up. Literally, the cops are going to show up and arrest you.
Yeah.
Right? If you smoke it, maybe even smoking in front of the hotel, you might get in trouble. You know, it's like, it just wasn't cool.
No. But somebody's house, like Jack Hare, you could crash at Jack's house and smoke all the weed you wanted as long as you shared it with Jack.
Right. Nice.
And he's another hero and pioneer, and then all the women, there's so many women that stood by all these folks, they are unsung heroes too, and whether it be Wham down in Santa Cruz or all these amazing, powerful women that stood by and either supported the guys or worked shoulder to shoulder with them, right? And a lot of times they don't get the credit they deserve. Right. And that's one thing, that's really important to me. I want folks like John Entwistle and there's a bunch of women that are interviewed in this film too, and they played a very important role. There are all kinds of queer people interviewed in this film that played a really important role. And there are going to be always stars among us, but for every star, there's a constellation of folks around them, orbiting around them, that has enabled that star to shine so brightly. And this film really celebrates that community. And you go backwards in time, right? You really see what kinds of clothes people wore, how the cannabis was presented at the Buyers Club, what kind of packaging these things had, how the menu was made for the people to experience, what a bud tender was like in those days. And you really get to go into a time capsule and see all of that, experience all of that.
And that's where packaging really got to start, was places like Harborside, where people started using real packaging, because before it was sandwich baggies that you would lick, or it was film canisters or whatever it was. There wasn't labels and packaging and information on there. And it slowly evolved out of the dispensary model and came to the point where it's just like everything else today.
Yeah, and the Buyers Club has plenty of Ziploc baggy packaging, but they have labels on there, to be fair. And, Dennis was selling so much weed so fast when he first opened that club. They just had to keep up, right? And just getting enough baggies was probably hard, right?
Dangerous.
Let alone a jar, because the cops could trace the packaging back to you. And why is someone ordering 20,000 little jars, Oh, well, they must be doing something weird with it. Let's take a look. And then, next thing you know, you're busted, right? Yeah. And so they had to be careful about stuff like that. And they were. And but once Harborside came along and we were licensed by the city, then Steve was like, okay, let's package this stuff in jars. Let's celebrate how amazing these buds are. Let's make sure they're in glass, not plastic, you know. We had the Mylar bags too, in those days. We couldn't put everything in glass jars, but nowadays, you have all kinds of different packaging options.
The options endless, right? The options are endless. Literally, the sky is the limit. You can get custom anything coming out of China. Whatever you can dream, you can turn into a package.
Yep.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And And so these things are becoming more and more common, right? All kinds of fancy packaging nowadays in the dispensaries and in the manufacturing and the cultivation, and it's great, But so you get to see that, you get to see the evolution of that, and you'll be so proud of the movie, right? It's such a good film because it does cover all of these things, right? All of these events: Brownie, Mary, the first bus, the Island Cafe, the first Buyers Club, the second Buyers Club, Tony Serra, the lawyer, is all over the movie, right? And you get to see Tony.
Younger Tony.
You get to see him doing the closing arguments for Brownie Mary's or maybe Dennis's trial, right? And for those of you who haven't seen Tony do a closing argument in a courtroom, no one did it as good as Tony. Maybe Robert Kunstler did it as good as Tony, but Tony was right there with Kunstler. Yeah. Great closing argument, and you get to see that, right? And Tony's interviewed in the movie too, and he recounts the whole story, right? And so the film just covers all these cases and all these things that happen, right? And there's a young Terrence Allen in the film, Terrence Allen, who started the Champ dispensary right after the Buyers Club. The Champ's dispensary had the first litigation with the IRS on 280E. That's called the Champ case.
Which we just got rid of. 280E is going away.
If S3 ends up happening, 280E is going to go away, right? And we just lost Terrence Allen a few months ago, for those of you that don't know. And Terrence is in the movie. He's in the movie as a young, very beautiful gay male in the movie, and he talks about being in the Buyers Club. And then he's interviewed later in life talking about recanting that history and that hipstery and that story for the modern times. And so, there are folks that aren't with us anymore, right? That are in the movie, and folks can experience their contributions as well. And so you really get to learn about all these human beings, right? Because at the end of the day, like anybody who owns a dispensary or your facility here, it's powered by people, man. This plant is powered by people. You can put, I don't know, as many robots as you want in your Venlo greenhouse. At some point, a human being's going to have to deal with that plant. Yeah. And I believe the more human beings work with the plant in a facility, the better the plant is, and I'm sure there are people that disagree with that, and maybe I'm just nostalgic for that touch, but it's pretty clear that cannabis and human beings evolved together. How else did we get this endocannabinoid system in our bodies? I mean, it goes all the way back to hunter-gatherer times. I mean, and so just like sweetgrass, sweetgrass, which is this Native American grass, earthly grass that Native American folks use for making baskets and weaving things. And it's a sacred plant in Native American. Sweetgrass does not grow as good wild as it does with people farming it or working with it in its
human interaction.
It's one of those plants that needs human interaction to thrive, right? Yeah. And I believe cannabis is like that too. And doesn't mean we can't benefit from technology. You got plenty of technology in this building, right? Having your watering cycles automated, well, that's great, right? No one's going to argue with that, especially our lower backs, right? Not going to argue with that. But working with the plant and our hands and the soil or whatever it is that folks are growing in, and harvesting and trimming and all of that, there's something about that exchange that I think is pretty valuable to both the plant and the people.
Walking around with 40 watts of energy, I mean, I think there's definitely vibration, and there's definitely, as far as human and plant interaction, there's these vibrations, that really are not measurable, but also that human interaction with the plants where you're looking at stuff, you're trying to optimize the environment, but definitely there's something about the human interaction with the plants in a room, even if it's fully automated. Plants have a soul too. I firmly believe that these plants have a soul. They have energy. You can tell by the effect. And a lot of people will say that's bro science, but I'm telling you that plants grown with love are better than plants that are just grown by a machine, right? And so there's something to that that's not really quantifiable, but it's there. And I believe it. I mean, I believe a lot of strange things. So it's one of those things, but I really believe that this plant is one of those things that the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. And I mean, I'm blessed to be able to work with this plant. It makes me smile on a daily basis. The fact that I get to do interviews with people like yourself, we get to talk about important things like Dennis Peron.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a blessing to be alive at this time with all the things that are going on. This plant still exists on an amazing level. We're able to smoke and consume amazing flower. And really, it's taking a life of its own on too. Because if you look at wild mustard, at one point, wild mustard was just wild mustard, right? But through human interaction, it turned into things like broccoli. It turned into things like cauliflower. It turned into things like Brussels sprouts, cabbage, which they look very similar, but one's smaller than the other. And even things like kale, right? Through human interaction. And I see cannabis is going in this direction as well. And like, we're just at the very tipping point of all this stuff going in all these different directions, but the potential is endless. We're looking at drug discovery on one side. We're looking at different types of uses on another and different ways we can use the plant and change the plant, whether it's for textiles or hempcrete. We're just starting to scratch the surface of this stuff. And it's so amazing for it to unfold right in front of our eyes, and something that was started before us with a plant that's been around forever. As far as we know, it's evolved alongside us for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And we're at the point where they were 2,500 years ago with brassica and cruciferous, basically, evolving wild mustard into something special. And we don't know those people that pushed that plant forward, but we have this opportunity with cannabis and technology to really get the stories of some of the people that have passed. So we get some of the stories from the people that love them, but also we're getting stories directly from the people that were involved in it, which I love.
Right. And the power of filmmaking or oral history projects or any of these things is it just like a seed, it can stick around for a long time if you take care of it right,
Yeah.
And you mentioned things that are unmeasurable, and I love things that are unmeasurable.
Yeah.
I just like consciousness. Science has not figured out a way to measure consciousness. I hope that never gets figured out, because there's just something like the universe. You can't measure the universe, right? There are plenty of people who try, but it's unmeasurable, right? And I love things that are unmeasurable because for me, they contain this binding agent of the universe, which is magic. And certainly love is the organizing principle, I believe, of the entire universe. And I just learned something new. I didn't realize that all these, my cauliflower comes from wild mustard. I think that's just amazing, right? And so, like, imagine what's going to come, right?
Could you imagine? And so, Bob Weir, his passing and his memorial happened just recently.
Yep.
And he talked about a 300-year legacy.
Yep.
Right. And so I was tripping good at his memorial service. Actually, everybody was, or well, not everybody, but there was definitely a lot of people that were having a good time. But I really got in deep into thought about his 300-year legacy and what that means in 300 years of the Grateful Dead and their legacy. And I'm thinking very similar to our community. What is our 300-year legacy? Because that could be something amazing as well. Just as amazing as the Grateful Dead and their legacy will be carried on for the next 300 years. I could see our industry adapting and evolving. And, I feel like it kind of started here and kind of started in the last 50 years. And that is going to evolve to something over the next 300 years that will be appreciated in something that was kind of influenced by today, maybe started thousands of years ago, but it's evolving over the next 300 years into something really special.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do think that our community and visionaries and leaders like yourself, we should be asking this question, the same question Bobby asked, right?
Yeah.
How can we make this continue, after we're gone?
Yeah.
And with the Grateful Dead, because it was music and it was community, and the music was open source, right? It wasn't bought and sold,
right?
And there are plenty of other things bought and sold at a Dead show, but the music itself was not, right? It was an open source music. And I think with this plant, one of the complicating factors is there are transactions involved with this plant. You can't trade this plant without a transaction, right? You can give it away, of course, and you can receive free cannabis, but the transactional nature of it can be a little dangerous for longevity, right? And so it's really up to us to ask that question, right? And I don't know if it's museums, seed vaults, film vaults, wax museums of the famous figures, all these different ways that people preserve. I think about jazz music. Jazz music's been around for more than 100 years now. And you can go down to New Orleans and you can experience the early pioneers of that music, right? And you can go to the museums and you can go listen to the Preservation Jazz Band play. And you can do all these things. And you can learn about that culture.
Right.
And it's culture, right? And that's what we have to emulate a little bit, right? And it's complicated by this transactional component, right? Because, someone's going to want to build a museum and charge money for it, right? And they may leave some stuff out, and it's such a comprehensive history with so many people, Louis Armstrong, big stoner, big advocate for the plant. Milton Mesro, another jazz musician, one of the biggest early traders of cannabis in New York and Chicago. These are all folks that make up our history. And I think we just have to keep asking ourselves, how are we going to extend this out 300 years, And hopefully we can stand shoulder to shoulder with the way the Grateful Dead and Bobby envisioned extending the community out 300 years, because cannabis is the sacrament, or one of the sacraments.
Right.
You mentioned psychedelics, that's another sacrament within the Grateful Dead culture. And so hopefully we can extend these things out together, so that as we extend the Grateful Dead out for 300 years and we, Dark Star and Joe Russo and Grateful Drag and all these amazing bands continue the music, right? And then they pass the music on to the next generation. Cannabis will be at every show, right? At every show. Psychedelics at every show. And, Lord knows, I probably did experience a couple shows without being under the influence of psychedelics for one reason or another, but very few, man. If you're on like a 4-night run or a 3-night run, you might have to take a rest on night 3,
For sure.
But that was, the ethos was, oh yeah, Dead show, I'm tripping.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, the funny thing is like I've come to the conclusion that a lot of people came there for the drugs and stayed for the music. And, it's funny. It's a great way to get turned on, not only to psychedelics, but really turned on to the music and turned on to the energy and the vibration and all the good things that are associated with the Grateful Dead that most people don't even hear about. They just think it's some hippie music and some tie-dye. And it's really just so much more than that. And it's kind of just this amazing part of our community that's really driven a lot of the change too. And behind the curtains, a lot of this stuff ties back to the Grateful Dead, ties back to the hippie community, the Summer of Love, all these things that kind of happened for us to get to this point where we're at now. And, looking 300 years in the future, I'm hoping that even if they don't remember me, that they're going to have some form of broccoli. Right?
Yeah, man.
Or some, our version of whatever that evolves into, that we were a key component on some level of the changes that occurred to get wild mustard into this other form, right? And that's the beauty of it. And even just thinking like that is we got to be part of something, right? Like, and I think that's what our purpose is here, right? Our purpose is to be part of something bigger than ourselves. It's to find purpose, right? Whatever that purpose might be. But, Bobby also said, death is the reward for living a life well served, or a life well lived.
Yeah.
Right. And I think those things make me feel that, I'm not afraid of death. I'm not worried about that. I haven't been for a long time, but I feel even better when I hear words like that. Like, so you're supposed to go out and you're supposed to live life, find your purpose, do that, do what makes you happy. Dennis Peron did it. Bobby did it. Jerry did it. They lived a life well served as well. And it's like serve to the greater good and the greater community. And, we could all hope to live a life that was that impactful.
Oh yeah. I think that's very well said. Bobby talked a lot about, the adventure that awaits all of us when we pass. And those of us that have that psychedelic consciousness can appreciate that there's an interconnectivity to all life and all phenomena in the universe. And really, the body form may change, it may go away, but the soul form, or the energetic form or the vibrational form doesn't, because it's all one creation. And so it goes, man. It goes just like a long Grateful Dead jam, man. It just keeps going. And so I can't say I'm not afraid of death. I'm conceptually not afraid of death, but like just on a just a human level, whenever I get really sick or I hurt myself, I get these catastrophic thoughts. I'm sure everybody does. And then I get a little scared, right? And then I have to resource myself, smoke a joint, maybe take some mushrooms or something. And then I can get over that fear and I can be like in a place where like, okay, it's all impermanent and I'm going to get back and I'm just going to return home to the flow of life, man. The life force that makes the heart beat. I don't tell my heart, hey, will you please beat now? Like it's happening on its own. I'm breathing on my own. All these things are happening in our body. Thousands of things are happening involuntarily in our bodies. What is the force that is doing that, right? One of the things I've asked myself since I was a little kid, what is the force that's doing that? I call it the life force. Some people call it other things, right? That's where we return to when we're not in the body anymore, right? I think, and the great mystery and adventure, as Bobby said, and we'll all get to experience that. And I take a lot of comfort in the words of Bob Weir said about that. And, he experienced some of his best friends, Jerry, others, died, man. And Bobby was the youngest by a long shot. He was the youngest by 10 years or something like that.
The kid. He was the kid, right? Amazing, though. Amazing talent. And just the egoless musician, if you can call him that, I think in, being in Jerry's shadow to, some degree, but also believing in his skills and believing in the band and believing in the bigger picture, and also being by far the best rhythm guitar player that ever existed, that was very talented and believed in something more than himself and really passed it on to people like us.
Yeah.
And we can talk about it on a podcast, but not just us, so many people, so many believers And I think, I believe that this is just not even the beginning, but I believe this is just one stage that we're going through, and we're all part of something so much bigger. And that after this, there is so much more. I believe, we talk about simulations. That's a big topic right now, as we all, and
sure.
I believe it's such an oversimplified version of what so many other things could be, whether you believe in religion, whether you believe we're in a computer simulation.
Right.
Calling it a simulation is an oversimplified version of what it could be. And I will tell you that I've seen it and I've been there, but it's more than we can comprehend in this reality. And I'm at peace knowing that we're all going to be okay, right? That's the one thing that I've come to the conclusion that we're all okay, right? And I love that, and I can rest on that no matter what happens to us, we're all okay.
Every little thing gonna be all right.
Exactly.
I think that's what Bob Marley's speaking to, that exact phenomenon. Everything's gonna be all right. So be brave.
Yeah.
Right? Be brave, because when you're on your deathbed, you're not going to be counting your money or your possessions. You're going to be counting how many times you were brave, or how many sunsets you saw, or how much time you spent with your kids or your loved ones, how many orgasms you had. These are the things that you're going to be thinking about, not the stuff, right? That we tend to worry about all day long, right?
Well, and the beauty of cannabis and the beauty of psychedelics and some of these other substances, right, is that it brings you into the present. Because a lot of times in this reality, we have every time you experience anything, you get a lens put over you, right? Good or bad, you see the world as it is right now because of your experiences that have happened since you were born, right? And these psychedelics can kind of take those filters off, right, and make you see the world how it really is, right? And that's part of the beauty of it. But you need to see the world in the present, right? You need to be present, living in the present.
Yeah.
And one of the beauties is when you're living in the present, you're not in the past or the future, because you can't change the past. And if you worry about the future, you're not going to experience it, right? So like on the same level.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And, Dennis loves psychedelics.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that about Dennis, but he went to the rainbow gatherings.
Nice.
And I would see him at the rainbow gatherings. Me and my brother would see him, and he was always at fairy camp, and we usually had our own kitchen. But we'd see each other on the trail, and we'd see each other at the prayer on 4th of July. And I remember Dennis would always offer me some acid at the rainbow gathering. And he'd always say, "Be careful, this one's strong." And so he was very big into psychedelic consciousness, and he was a hippie, man, and he was a gay hippie, and there was this whole queer wing of the hippie movement, that just like there was a whole feminist wing to the hippie movement, and there was a whole people of color wing to the hippie movement, like Jimi Hendrix, man, is a perfect example. And so that was the thing about hippie culture that I fell in love with, was just how inclusive it was, and that you could be anybody from any background and turn yourself into a hippie pretty easily, right? And be accepted. Generally speaking, okay, was the patriarchy and all the mainstream problems and mainstream culture trickling down to hippie culture? Well, yeah, because our minds were conditioned in the mainstream culture. You're just talking about that. The conditioning of the mind, right? Your whole life. And we're still dealing with that somewhat in cannabis culture. It's really male heavy. We need more women leadership. And I know you've had a lot of women on this podcast, and we just need to keep doing that work, right? Because we want to be proud of ourselves, right? And so when I would see Dennis coming down the trail at a rainbow gathering, or I'd go up to fairy camp, it was just such a beautiful experience. Dennis used to say something to me that was really funny. He used to say, "Andrew, it's okay that you're straight as long as you don't flaunt it." And I remember the first time, I'll just tell this story because we're probably coming close to the end here, but the first time I met Dennis, I went to college in Southern California at a school called Chapman University. In those days, it was called Chapman College. It was just a small backwater school. And I studied theater arts, and I was trying to be an actor in those days. And I auditioned for some summer stock up here in the Bay Area, and I got a job doing summer stock up here. And I didn't know anybody. And my older brother, Steve, was like, no problem, man. I know Dennis Peron. He's my buddy. You can stay at his house. I'll call him up. We'll arrange it, man. I'll drive you up there from college. And I'm like, cool, man. Great. I got a place to crash until I find an apartment. And I didn't know who Dennis was. And Steve did not tell me anything, okay, about the castle or Dennis. He didn't even tell me Dennis was queer, okay? And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to meet a big stoner dude, weed dealer. I'm going to get in the inside, and it's going to be great. So we walk into the house, and all I have is a backpack. I'm going to summer stock. I'm 18 years old. I have no possessions, And I quickly realize in about the first 10 seconds that this is a gay household. Not only that, me and my brother and Ruby Pearl, my brother's girlfriend at the time, we were the only hetero people in the house that day or any day. All right. And I remember Dennis would take you up to his room. He had his private bedroom, and he had little meetings up there, and he'd take you up there to get away from, because there were 20, 30 people always at Dennis's house at that time. And they were, people that were sick, and there were people that were caring for the sick, and there were activists, and they were artists. And the guy who designed the gay flag, Gilbert, I think was his name, he was always there. And John Entwistle was always there. And so he would take you up to the room. And I remember he handed my brother a tray and said, roll a joint. Let's talk. Let me take a look at Andrew and make sure he's cool staying here. And I said, I'll roll the joint. So I knew if I could just do something right, and I could roll a good joint. I was pretty good at rolling joints. So I rolled a joint, and Dennis is asking me questions like, well, so what are you doing in San Francisco? I'm studying summer stock. I'm in a theater. Oh, you're an actor. You're in theater. Oh, that's good. Because a lot of people in theater are queer, right? Totally. And so he starts sizing me up, right? And he can quickly get the vibe that I'm not queer, right? And so that's when he said that first time to me, where he looked at me and he said, okay, Andrew, I'm going to let you stay here until you find a place. And it's okay if you're straight, as long as you don't flaunt it. But here are the rules of my house. And he had rules of the house. And you could do whatever you wanted in the house, as long as it wasn't violent or homophobic. And that you treated everybody with love and respect, and that you were there for dinner. You had to be there for dinner. That was the rule. Everybody who crashed at Dennis's house had to be there for dinner. And I remember it was one of the, of course, and you had to help with dinner. It wasn't just be there for dinner. You had to help prepare the meal. You had to help serve the meal, and you had to help clean up. That was very important. So that was a big rule in Dennis's house. And so the first night or two, I'm in there and I'm helping prep, and Dennis did all the cooking. So Dennis would come in after everything was prepped, and he would decide what we were eating, probably with a crew of people, and then we'd prep everything, and then he'd come into the kitchen and he'd cook it all up, like, right. Typical Italian. And then we would share the meal together, and there were people eating all over the house, right? There's all over the place. And, after we cleaned up and everything, we would, smoke weed together and do art projects or activist projects or whatever it was. And I remember one night after dinner, I've helped clean up and everything. And Dennis's living room with this big TV was right next to the kitchen. And I walk in there and I sit down to roll joints. I was good at rolling joints. And so that was kind of the way I belonged. I tried to belong at Dennis's house was I'd roll joints. And I'm sitting there rolling joints and somebody puts on like the hardest core gay porno on the TV that I've ever seen in my life, right? I mean, I've never seen gay porn up to that point. And there's like some nasty things going on in the screen. And I couldn't move because I'm like there's all these people around me, right? And half of them are naked, right? Or barely dressed. And they're all like reviewing the film. They're oh, that boy's cute. Oh, is he 18? And, and they're reviewing, they're like making commentary. And I'm just going, no. And I'm rolling joints. And I was like, oh man, I got to get to my room. I got to get out of here. This is really uncomfortable, man. And I think all the people that were in the room with me enjoyed watching me squirm a little bit because I was like the straight guy in the house. I mean, that was like, I don't know, that was very rare that a hetero male was in that house. And so that was just a eye-opening experience for an 18-year-old who had just graduated from college, who was trying to be an actor in San Francisco. And that's where I saw the first people who were really sick, and that also educated me because when I was in college, we were terrified of HIV, right? We were practicing massive safe sex, man. You would wear 2 condoms, man.
Wow.
And you were always getting tested, and the school would let you, would give you a test if you wanted it, and they would pay for it and all this stuff. And
there was real fear in the 80s and 90s, like real fear. Like people were, a lot of our viewers weren't around in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And so there were people that were afraid of using the same toilet, right? Stuff that's just totally asinine, totally crazy.
Yeah.
Like hugging. People were afraid to hug people.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky in the sense that I got an inside view of a lot of it from my aunt and her friends too.
Mm.
And, it's just really sad that we had to go through all that and lack of education, lack of understanding. And it wasn't only gay people that got AIDS. There was other people, but there was this really, it was looked down upon. It was by the average person. It was looked like it was a death sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like we've gone through so many tough times to the point where, it's still not easy. People that have AIDS, it's still not easy, but they also have drugs that make it a lot easier. Your success, your potential for living a lot longer or living a normal life is so much greater.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And again, it speaks to the stigma, right? That was around. Remember, Ronald Reagan's president during this time, and then his vice president, George H. Bush, right? H, not W-H.
Correct.
Won election. And so there was 12 years of these guys in power, man. And they would not even say the word HIV/AIDS. They would not even say it publicly, right? They denied that this was even happening. Okay. And so when you're in college in that environment and you're trying to get laid, like everybody in college is trying to do, you're scared.
Yeah.
You're like asking your potential person you're going to sleep with all these questions, right? Before you sleep with them. And it was expected if you were like hetero and you were the guy that you would have all the protection needed, right?
Right.
And I'm sure if you were queer, it was the same way. Both people had to have all the protection that was needed. And because we knew at that time that blood was part of how, like people that were drug addicts sometimes got HIV by sharing needles together.
Right.
Sometimes you'd get it in a blood transfusion, before the hospitals were checking.
Kids got it that way.
Kids got it that way. Yeah. And everybody who got it was stigmatized, right? Your aunt, I'm sure, too, right?
Yeah, hers was from IV drug use.
It's the dark side of America, is just this stigmatization, this hatred of the other, this sort of looking down at people because they're queer or they're sick or they're a stoner or they're black or whatever it is. They're different. They're different, right? And it was a terrible moment in American history because we had yet another thing, HIV, that stigmatized people. You know, we had yet another way that you could become the other.
Right.
You know, we're still with this terrible relationship with the perceived other
right.
to this day. You know, I mean, when Reagan was what ICE is doing today, the DEA was doing in the 80s, man. It was the same. Okay. They were coming in hard.
Right.
Militaristic. Okay. Shoot Dennis in the leg first, show the badge second. All right. And you'll learn about this when you see the movie, but the cop who shot Dennis regretted the fact that he didn't kill Dennis.
Wow.
Regretted the fact that he didn't kill Dennis. That's how much gay people were hated by the cops in San Francisco at that time. And I'm sure in some parts of the country, even today, we're here in the Bay Area, we're in this little progressive bubble, right?
Right.
You go down to Mobile, Alabama, okay, and you try to tell your family that you're queer, it's a different conversation than if you have that same conversation over in Castro Valley, right? Yeah. So I just think that was a very difficult time to becoming sexually awakened, you know, because of that fear. There were a lot of times where you just didn't have sex with somebody because you were too scared. You didn't know them good enough. You didn't know what was going down. And like you said, there was people who thought you could get it from sitting on the same toilet.
Yeah.
As somebody.
Or
hugging somebody, right? And I was in Orange County, California in college. So like those myths were like circulating big time, you know, and being perpetrated really. I mean, being, you know, amplified, you know, in Orange County, California. The sort of the epicenter of Reaganism was that county in California, right? And so, you know, we've definitely come a long way from those days in some respects, you know, but in other respects, as we're seeing with immigration right now, we have not.
It's all within our lifetime too.
All within our lifetime. And if you would have asked me when when I was in college, where we would be right now, I would not have guessed that we would be where we're at right now. I was very idealistic, and I believed we were going to change the world. And I believed we were going to end things like racism and bigotry and homophobia and sexism. And I thought those things would be in the dustbin of history by the time I middle-aged or an old man. And boy, was I wrong.
Yeah, and I mean, but I think with the way the economy is and the way that the world works, there has to be separation, right? There's the separation of the upper and the lower class. There's less middle class, and it's what keeps the rich richer and the poor poorer. I'm not saying anything about people's financial status in a negative way.
No.
But there's that separation, and separation of, we've always had it about people that are different, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And our generation is the most accepting not only our generation, but the place we live in is by far the most accepting place that I've ever been to, right? Of whatever you are, whoever you are, if you're different, it's okay. We're in the Bay Area, so you're accepted. No problem. Whatever you believe, as long as you're not a bad person, you're not hurting anybody, it's okay to be here. And that's one of the things I love the most about the Bay Area is you can be different and you're still okay, right? On whatever that means, it doesn't matter, right? And that's the beauty of the Grateful Dead too. Like, as long as you like good music, you're okay.
Yeah, I mean, even in Oakland, there's this giant Mormon church.
Yeah.
In Oakland, the home of the Black Panthers. You've got a giant Mormon church with a significant Mormon population that's here in the Bay Area, and they're not getting run out of town.
No.
They're not. No one's, trying to burn down their church or anything like that. They're accepted as part of the fabric of the community. They've got some great real estate, I'll say that.
For sure.
And so even conservative people, have a place here. They may be smaller in numbers.
Yeah.
But you can get in a deep conversation with a conservative person in the Bay Area. And that conversation, and a lot of times it's hard to have those conversations outside of the Bay Area. Everyone's kind of only meets with whoever's in their little tribal group, right? Yeah.
Well, I'm a conservative Bay Area person myself, and I'm what you would consider a conservative Bay Area because I believe in fiscal responsibility, but I also believe in freedom. Right. And so I would say that more and more I'm a moderate in the middle, and I don't want to pick on either party. I believe in things from both parties. I also don't believe in things from both parties.
Yeah.
And I think that there's more and more people like me too that are somewhere in the middle.
I'm right there with you, man.
And I have a hard time
on both their houses.
I think the extremes on both parts are difficult for me to align with. Right. And I see beauty in both sides, and I see beauty, but more so on the individual things that we're talking about and discussing rather than on the party basis, right? Because you start breaking it down like by the party, and I think you guys are both crazy. I think that we can talk about agenda and we can talk about other things, but I think the individual items, we can go through and argue about those all day long because I have very strong beliefs and very strong thoughts about individual things. But the party alignment, I have a really difficult time aligning with anything right now.
Yeah, I've been a registered independent, I don't know, 3 or 4 decades.
Yeah.
Right? Because I've seen both parties sell out the people, man. I mean, the Democrats are in power here in California. Look what they've done with cannabis legalization and the licensing frameworks and all the rest of it. Not good.
Yeah.
Not good for people. Not good for planet, okay? Not good for our community. Democrats did that, right? Then, you can say equally disappointing things about the Republicans, right? Yeah. And I'm at the point where it's just a pox on both their houses, man, and we need a new way. We need to be, it starts with folks like you and I, where we're independent, we take the issues one at a time, we see positive aspects, in all arguments that people make, and we try to incorporate elements. It's like being a chef. You come from the culinary world, right? Sometimes you need some, different spice in there that you like saffron. Only use a little tiny bit, right? Yeah. And it's a very conservative spice.
Yeah.
But it's a very powerful spice, and it's an awesome spice, right? I love saffron, right? Who doesn't love saffron rice? I mean,
Used correctly, it's amazing.
Used correctly, it's amazing. You put too much, oh man, you can't eat it, right? You can't eat it. It's so fragrant, right? And so it's about mixing things up to make a policy, right, that works for people, and planet. Okay. And not going too far in any one direction, like we can't build affordable housing because there's too much regulation on people. There just is, man. We've taken it too far. Okay. And we have to sort of make sure we can build affordable housing, right? Because it's a big problem, right? And one of the things that came out of the work Dennis did and our community did is this idea of a sharing economy, right? Where we're all taken care of. Maybe no one's doing super big, All right. Maybe no one has $1 billion company or is a billionaire in our space right now. I don't think there are any people who have made $1 billion from weed yet.
Ben Dronkers.
Dronkers has? Okay.
He is a billionaire. Yes.
Oh, well, good for
Ben is the one, right?
All right. I love Ben. So not gonna say anything. He earned every dollar, right?
He's the exception though, right? I mean, I don't know any other cannabis billionaires that have made made $1 billion
purely
off
from
cannabis.
the plant. Purely from the plant, right? They didn't start out in a rich family or anything like that, right? And so, and maybe more of that's going to emerge. More, concentration of wealth will come out of corporate cannabis or whatever, industrial cannabis. But this sharing economy, all right, that happened during the Prop 215 days, especially here in California, and you see it in the caregiver model in places like Michigan and my friends down at Rainbow Farm, and you're seeing it. It's still out there, right? This sharing economy within our community it hasn't gone extinct,
right?
All right, it might have been really disrupted, but it hasn't gone extinct. And so that model still exists, right?
Yeah.
Where everybody's taken care of, nobody gets super rich, but everyone can live a nice middle class, maybe upper middle class lifestyle, right? And for most of the cannabis people I know, that's what they care about. Yeah. They care about being able to provide for their kids, send them to a good school, which might not be a public school, or have enough resources to homeschool.
Right.
Have childcare. These basic things, all right, that the super rich people just have, right? And the middle and upper middle class folks, especially middle class folks, are getting squeezed so hard right now.
Well, the middle class is going away.
It's going away.
It's going away, especially compared to the 80s and 90s, right? We're in a way different time. Yeah. You're on one spectrum or the other, right?
Yeah,
There's not a lot in the middle that are just making it that can afford to buy a house, right? It's not easy to buy a house anymore.
No.
It used to be something a janitor could do if he worked really hard at an average job. He could buy a house in America, and that's changing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so all of your listeners, if you're getting a real paycheck, whether you're in the industry or out of the industry, you should know something called the Federal Housing Authority. And you can get a loan from you can get approval from the Federal Housing Authority to put a 3% down payment on a house. You have to have good credit and you have to have that paycheck coming in. But that's how I bought my house, man. I had the Harborside paycheck and I didn't have enough money for a 20% down payment. And for some reason, the Federal Housing Administration didn't know that I was in the weed business when I got the loan from them.
You got lucky.
I got lucky.
You got really lucky because
and
that wouldn't have flown.
Yeah, this was, right after the mortgage crisis. So this was
2009.
I got my house, I think, in 12, right? 12. So they still wanted people. So the one part of the government wasn't talking to the other part of the government, and I got the loan. Now that might be harder for folks right now that are listening to this, but there are plenty of folks that maybe are getting that paycheck that you should try, right? Because they might not catch it, number one, or you might not be plant touching, right? And so you might be able to get it that way. Then you only need 3% down payment. You still need to be able to afford the home,
Love or hate Schedule 3, it might open the doors up for people to be able to buy houses.
There you go, right? And get these FHA loans and get small business administration loans, which we can't get right now.
Write-offs.
Oh, all the write-offs are going to make everyone who has an LLC or S Corp just, your balance sheet's going to get so much better, right? Of course. So these are, we want to get into this normalization, and this is what cats like Dennis fought for, right? Yeah. This is what cats like Dennis got shot for, and cats like Richard DeLisi went to prison for, was this kind of mainstream access that our people should never have been denied, and certainly shouldn't be denied any longer, right? And we have to demand that. And, we have to beat back these initiatives in Maine and Massachusetts and Arizona and these efforts to ban hemp and these other things, right? We're going backwards, not forwards in some degree. But the ultimate prize is this normalization that we're talking about right now, and access to these mechanisms that allow people to do things like own a home, right? Or allow people to do things like have universal childcare,
Well, and to me, these are the freedoms that I talk about that we all deserve, right? We deserve freedom, and I think that's why I do what I do is for the freedom. It's like I own my own business. I do this stuff. I don't work a 9-to-5 with other people, so I can have freedoms. And these are the freedoms that I'm talking about.
Yeah, you work 24/7.
Yeah, I do, but I also do it because I love what I do, and I'm passionate about the plant, and I feel like there's no time like the present to make a difference and to do the things we can. Same thing with genetics. It's like the present is right now, and it's one of those things. We have a finite amount of time left. I don't know how much that is, but there's a limited amount of time left, right, for me to be able to do the things I need to do to make a difference. And that's what should motivate everybody, that we only have so many hours in a day, and we only have so many days of our life left to be able to do the things that we want to do to make a difference, whether it's a difference to our family, a difference to ourselves, or a difference to the whole world.
Yeah, that's right. And as the decades pass in your life, some of your viewers and listeners might be in their 20s and 30s. So you have a different relationship to time when you're younger. But once you start hitting mid 40s, mid 50s, like I am, even into your 60s, you realize that time is precious and that we don't have a lot of it. And we have to make the most of every moment, every breath, right? And,
make them experiences. At the end of the day, let's make them all experiences, right? Because we're experiencing them. So make them memorable, make them amazing, and don't be lazy. That's,
Yeah, I mean, I live by a very same motto. If you come over to my house, you won't see a lot of fancy stuff.
Yeah.
You'll see pictures of trips I've taken or things I've done, experiences that I've had, right? Yeah. And that's what I've chosen to invest in my whole life. I got that message from that first joint I smoked, man. I got the message. It was like, man, it's not about stuff. Because before I smoked that joint, I thought, okay, I'm going to go be a lawyer. I'm going to make a lot of money. I'm going to, make my dad happy. I'm going to be a good son and all this stuff, right? All this conformity, because it was 1980s. It was all about conforming. If you wore the wrong thing, if you even just wore black in the 1980s, you were like the other, you had to wear the polo shirt or whatever. And that was like, conformity was a big thing then.
Bobby loved those polo shirts.
He did, man.
He did
not like tie-dye.
No, he did not.
He hated tie-dye.
He liked short shorts and he liked polo shirts.
Well, I mean, if you got the body for the short shorts, wear them, man. That's all I can say.
Because those short shorts were just as wild as any tie-dye that I've ever seen,
Oh, I know. He would wear, and frankly, they were sometimes pretty ugly. I mean, I liked the cut-off jeans because that seemed really hippie, but like he would have some of these ones that were like really colorful and they almost look like surfer kind of shorts, and and they were short, man. I mean, they were. And Bobby was in great shape. He took care of himself. He exercised a lot. And so he had the legs for it. And he flaunted it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this podcast has been a lot of fun, man. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I'm looking forward to doing some projects this year with you. I think there's a lot of potential for stuff that we're doing and a lot of crossovers. So we have some big announcements hopefully to make in the near future. But and I look forward to seeing you at the premiere.
Me too. Thanks for having me on, James. I hope everybody will hurry up and buy tickets because we're going to sell out the Roxy.
Yeah. Yeah. And make sure you come. I'm giving out gift bags for everybody.
To go to see this film, you go to the URL that's part of this post and podcast. You can also go to the San Francisco Independent Film Festival website. And there's going to be a bunch of social media posts from all kinds of people, James, myself, and the QR code to buy tickets will be embedded in those posts.
Yep.
And you will probably also see postcards at your favorite Bay Area dispensary that will also have a QR code that will take you to tickets. It is February 7th, which is a Saturday at 6 p.m., the Roxy Theater in San Francisco. It's on 16th Street, not far from Mission and Valencia Street. I think it's 16th and Valencia is basically where the Roxy Theater is. Meadow is on 13th and DuBose, or 13th and Market, 13th and DuBose, I think it is. And the information will also be available for folks that have bought tickets or are part of the movie to go to the reception. And I just hope to see everybody there. You are going to stand up and cheer when you see this movie. I promise you. So one thing that's really important for everybody to understand, this movie does not have formal distribution yet. So seeing it at the Roxy Theater may be your only chance to see the movie. I'm going to work very hard with the filmmakers to get this film distribution, but it's really hard to get independent films distributed these days. So, and particularly a theatrical release for a documentary film is very rare. So this may be the only chance to see it on the big screen right in the town that Dennis did all this work, San Francisco. So that's very important too, because we don't have distribution. This may really be the only chance you can see it in a theater. So come on out to the Roxy on February 7th.
Amazing. Yeah, you can find out more about tickets. Just go to my Instagram page and we'll have a link directly for ticket sales there so you guys can go. But yeah, thank you again.
Thanks, James. Always a pleasure.
Well, this is the McDonald's of marijuana, is it?
Yeah, you could say that.
They're getting high without getting arrested.
The Cannabis Buyers Club.
Cannabis Buyers Club.
The Cannabis Buyers Club.
Both pot, pharmacy, and social club.
Just about everybody in here is violating the law, openly, almost defiantly.
Dennis Peron, he's the founder of the club.
Dennis was a bit of a wild man.
I want to change the world, so I started my own commune.
Every night we would sell pot to about 500-600 people.
I made thousands. I spread the money around. I fired a lot to harm those.
Dennis was a good contributor to our campaign, always in cash.
AIDS will kill 99% of those who have it.
The government wasn't doing anything.
People who had absolutely nowhere to go, Dennis would house them.
Jonathan was his lover then.
He was 90 pounds. Marijuana was keeping Jonathan alive for the last 3 years of his life.
That tragedy changed him.
He saw that marijuana had medicinal value.
I am breaking the law to help sick and dying people.
I started with them. Fully expecting to get busted.
I'm like, y'all crazy. This is crazy. I can't do this.
The government has declared war.
It's the war against marijuana. Narcotics agents say these are not good Samaritans, but drug pushers.
They hate me. They hate every gay person in San Francisco.
It was an outright illegal operation. We contacted the Attorney General of the state of California. I showed evidence, I showed video, and their jaws dropped.
There was no reason whatsoever for us to say no.
You could see them spying on the club.
This was a direct assault on our community.
The DEA were at our door, videotaping members, following stick people home, and we're here to tell them to leave us alone.
Dennis wrote this very, very simple proposition, and it was brilliant.
We want marijuana reinstated as a medicine for those that need it. Now the club is taking its message statewide. We're going to collect 500,000 signatures.
Dennis helped bring together people who were working in the AIDS community with people who were working in drug policy reform.
This was the largest AIDS hospice in the city.
We estimated 3,500 people going in an afternoon.
It was a great social services project, not being done by the city and not being done by a church. It was being done by the sale of pot.
Hanging over the club is a cloud of uncertainty about just how much longer it can legally operate.
Charges contained in the indictment are very clear.
You have to immediately cease operation.
This is the club for sick and dying people. We are not going to shut down.
Every time we were ready to do something, Dennis Peron knew about it.
Dennis Peron was arrested last weekend.
We cannot turn the other cheek. We have to fight back.
This is a crime against the sick and the dying. Our pain will change this country.
You a drug pusher?
No. I'm a pharmacist more than anything.
Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you guys very much for your support. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe down below.